Ambassador Kethvaro had served the Volanthi Confederacy for 40 cycles. In that time, he had studied over 300 different species across the galaxy. He had seen creatures that breathed fire and beings made entirely of light. He had met species that communicated through colors and others that shared a single mind across millions of bodies. Nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. The Volanthi were an ancient people. They had traveled the stars for thousands of cycles before most species learned to make fire. They were logical, calm, and proud of their scientific achievements. Long ago, they had believed in gods and spirits, just like many young civilizations. But they had outgrown such things. They had put away their temples and burned their holy books. Religion, they believed, was a disease of the mind that faded as species matured. When the Confederacy first detected human signals from a small blue planet called Earth, they watched with casual interest. Humans were young, barely a few thousand cycles into their civilization. They fought wars among themselves and polluted their own world. But they also showed remarkable creativity and determination. Within a few generations, had gone from riding horses to flying among the stars. The Confederacy Council decided that humans were worth studying. They sent Kethvaro to make first contact. The human vessel was called the Horizon's Edge. It was a small research ship, nothing compared to the massive Velananthi cruisers. But it was well built and functional. Kethvaro docked his shuttle and stepped aboard with 2 assistants, ready to begin his assessment. Captain Daniel Moore met them at the airlock. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with a small flag on his shoulder. When he saw Kethvaro, he did something unexpected. He smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome aboard," Daniel said warmly. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." Kethvaro had read about human handshakes. He extended his own 4-fingered hand and allowed the captain to grip it briefly. The gesture felt strange, but not unpleasant. "Thank you for receiving us," Kethvaro replied through his translator device. "The Volanthi Confederacy wishes to learn about your species. We want to learn about yours," Daniel said. "Come, let me show you around." The tour was informative. The ship carried a crew of 62 humans, all specialists in various fields. There were scientists, engineers, doctors, and soldiers. They worked together smoothly, each one contributing to the ship's mission. Kethvaro noted their efficiency with approval, but something else caught his attention. As they walked through the ship, he noticed small details that puzzled him. A crew member wore a tiny golden symbol around her neck. Another had a string of beads wrapped around his wrist. In the mess hall, Kethvaro saw a man bow his head and move his lips silently before eating. "What is that crew member doing?" Kethvaro asked, pointing to the man. Daniel glanced over. "Oh, that's Lieutenant Kevin Santos. He's saying grace. It's a prayer before meals." "Prayer?" Kethvaro's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "You mean communication with a deity?" "That's right. Kevin is Catholic. He thanks God for his food before he eats." Kethvaro felt a strange sensation in his chest. It took him a moment to identify it as surprise. "Your species still practices religion?" Daniel nodded, seemingly unaware of how shocking this was. "Many of us do, yes. We have hundreds of different faiths. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and many others. Religion is an important part of human culture." This information disturbed Kethvaro deeply. He had assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would have abandoned superstition long ago. The Volanthi had done so. Every other advanced species in the Confederacy had done the same. Yet here were humans, building starships, while still praying to invisible beings. Later that day, Kethvaro met with the ship's chief engineer, a young woman named Grace Kim. She was brilliant. Having designed several improvements to the ship's power systems, she explained complex technical concepts with ease, demonstrating a sharp and logical mind. But around her neck hung a small golden cross. "May I ask about your ornament?" Kethvaro said, pointing to the cross. Grace touched it gently. "It's a cross. It represents my faith in Jesus Christ." "Who is Jesus Christ?" Grace considered how to explain. "Christians believe he was the Son of God, sent to Earth 2,000 years ago. He taught people to love one another and sacrificed himself to save humanity from sin. I believe he rose from the dead and that through him I can have eternal life. Kethvaro struggled to process this information. You believe a being died and came back to life? Yes. And you believe in an afterlife? A continuation of consciousness after physical death? I do, Grace said simply. I believe that when I die, I'll be with God in heaven. But you are a scientist, Kethvaro protested. You understand physics, chemistry, biology. How can you believe in things that cannot be proven? Grace smiled patiently. Ambassador, I've thought about that question my whole life. Science is wonderful. It tells me how the universe works, but it doesn't tell me why I'm here or what my purpose is. My faith answers those questions. They work together, not against each other. Surely you must see the contradiction. You demand evidence for scientific claims but accept religious claims without proof. It's not about proof, Grace said. It's about faith. I feel God's presence in my life. I see his work in the kindness of others, in the beauty of creation, in the love I have for my family. That's not something I can put under a microscope, but it's real to me. Kethvaro did not know how to respond. He had never encountered this kind of thinking in an advanced species. The Velanthi had complex emotions and social bonds, but they did not attribute these things to supernatural forces. That night, Kethvaro sat alone in his quarters and composed a report to the Confederacy Council. He described humanity's technological achievements and social structures. But most of his report focused on their religious practices. Humans retain primitive belief systems despite their scientific advancement, he wrote. They worship invisible deities, believe in afterlives, and perform rituals that serve no practical purpose. This is unprecedented among spacefaring species. I theorize that these beliefs will fade as humanity continues to develop. For now, they represent a curious anomaly in an otherwise promising species. He sent the report and prepared for sleep. But as he lay in the darkness, he could not stop thinking about Grace Kim and her golden cross. She was intelligent, logical, and highly capable. Yet she believed in things that could not be seen or measured. How could someone so smart believe something so impossible? Kethvaro did not know the answer. But over the coming cycles, he would learn that human faith was not a weakness to be outgrown. It was a strength that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he understood about the universe. He simply did not know it yet. 3 cycles had passed since Kethvaro's first meeting with humans. The Confederacy Council had approved a joint scientific mission, and Kethvaro was assigned as liaison officer aboard the human vessel, Starward Hope. He told himself it was a routine assignment. In truth, he was fascinated by these strange beings who prayed to invisible gods while building machines that bent space and time. The Starward Hope was larger than the horizon's edge. Carrying a crew of 200, its captain was a woman named Lisa Bennett, a stern but fair leader from a place called Montana. She had served in the human military for 20 years before taking command of this vessel. Her crew respected her deeply. Kethvaro spent most of his time observing. He watched humans work, eat, argue, and laugh. He saw them celebrate birthdays and mourn the deaths of distant family members. He noticed that many of them still practiced religious rituals. Some prayed before meals. Others attended weekly services in a small room they called a chapel. A few wore symbols of their faith openly, but he also saw that not all humans believed. Some openly rejected religion, calling it outdated superstition. Others simply did not care about such things. Humanity, it seemed, was divided on the question of gods. This made them even more puzzling. The mission proceeded smoothly until they received a distress signal from Valen Prime, a small colony on the edge of Confederacy space. The message was desperate. A reactor had failed, and radiation was spreading through the colony. 17,000 colonists, both human and Velanthi, would die within 6 standard hours unless they were evacuated. The Starward Hope was the closest vessel capable of reaching them in time. Captain, Bennett called an emergency meeting in the command center. Kethvaro attended as an observer. He watched the humans study the data with grim expressions. Can reach Valen Prime in 4 hours, the navigator reported. That gives us 2 hours to evacuate before the reactor goes critical. How many can we save? Lisa asked her first officer, a man named Samuel Wright, ran the calculations. His face went pale. Captain, our shuttles can carry 8,000 people at maximum capacity. With 2 hours and the distance involved, we can make 1 trip. Maybe 1.5 if we push hard. The room went silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They could save roughly half the colonists. The other half would die. Caitiff's single quotes Vero felt cold. In Valanthi's society, such situations were handled with mathematical precision. You saved who you could and accepted the loss of the rest. It was logical. It was efficient. It was the only R. A Shanel response. He expected the humans to begin discussing selection criteria. Who would be saved? The young, the healthy, the most valuable? Instead, Lisa Bennett closed her eyes. Her lips moved slightly, and Cathvaro recognized the motion. She was praying. When she opened her eyes, there was fire in them. We save everyone, she said. Samuel stared at her. Captain, the math doesn't work. It's impossible. Then we change the math, Lisa replied. We push the engines harder. We pack the shuttles tighter. We find every available space on this ship and fill it with people. We do not leave anyone behind. But the risks? I don't care about risks. Lisa's voice was sharp. Those are 17,000 souls down there. Mothers, fathers, children, each one of them matters. We will find a way. What followed was unlike anything Cathvaro had ever witnessed. The humans worked with an intensity that bordered on madness. Engineers pushed the engines beyond their rated limits, finding extra power through sheer creativity. Medical staff cleared every storage room and corridor to make space for survivors. Pilots flew shuttles so fast and so recklessly that Cathvaro was certain they would crash. Grace Kim was there, working on the power systems. She had been assigned to the Starward Hope a few months earlier. Cathvaro found her in the engine room, surrounded by cables and screens.
Ow.
The power grid can't handle this load, one of her assistants said desperately. If we push any harder, the whole system will fail. Grace stared at the data for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes and whispered something Cathvaro could not hear. When she opened her eyes, she began typing rapidly. Reroute power from the secondary life support to the shuttle bays, she said. Reduce gravity in non-essential sections by 50%. Divert all recreational power to the engines. That's against regulations. Do it, Grace commanded. They did. And somehow, impossibly, the system held. The evacuation was chaos. Shuttles flew back and forth at dangerous speeds. Colonists were packed into every available space. The Starward Hope itself descended into the atmosphere, something it was never designed to do, to reduce shuttle travel time. Dr. Nathan Cole, the chief medical officer, worked for 9 hours straight without rest. He treated radiation sickness, performed emergency surgeries, and saved lives that should have been lost. When his assistants begged him to take a break, he refused. I'll rest when everyone is safe, he said, with 30 minutes left before the reactor exploded. The last shuttle launched from Valen Prime. It was overcrowded and barely functional, but it carried the final 300 colonists. Except there was a problem. We're 200 over capacity, the pilot reported. I can't achieve escape velocity. We need to reduce weight. On the Starward Hope, Lisa Bennett made a decision without hesitation. Send the coordinates. I'm taking the captain's shuttle down personally to pick up the overflow. Captain? There's no time, Samuel protested. You won't make it back before the explosion. Your survival probability is less than 3%. Lisa was already walking toward the shuttle bay. Then I'd better fly fast. Cathvaro followed her. He did not know why. Perhaps he wanted to understand what drove her to such irrational behavior. Captain Bennett, he called out. This is illogical. Your death serves no purpose if you cannot save those colonists. Lisa stopped and turned to face him. She was calm, almost peaceful, like ambassador. Where I come from, we have a saying from our scriptures, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down their life for their friends. You are willing to die for strangers. They're not strangers, Lisa said. They're people. And every person matters to God. If my death can give them a chance to live, then it's worth it. She climbed into her shuttle and launched into the burning sky. Kethvaro watched her go. He ran the calculations in his head. The probability of her survival was 2.7%. She knew this. She had gone anyway. He did not understand. But for the first time in his long life, he wanted to. The reactor exploded 17 minutes later. The blast wave spread across the colony, destroying everything in its path. Captain Lisa Bennett's shuttle was caught at the edge of the explosion. She should have died. She did not. When the rescue ships finally arrived at Valen Prime, they found Captain Lisa Bennett alive. Her shuttle had crashed in a maintenance tunnel beneath the colony's surface. A structural beam had fallen at exactly the right angle to shield her from the worst of the radiation. The explosion had destroyed everything above ground, but the tunnel had held. She was injured, unconscious, and barely breathing. But she was alive. The humans called it a miracle. Kethvaro called it a statistical anomaly. But as he stood in the medical bay watching Dr. Nathan Cole treat Lisa's wounds, he could not shake the feeling that something did not add up. He had calculated the probabilities himself. The chance of her survival was 2.7%. The chance of a beam falling at that precise angle was perhaps 0.3%. The chance of her being found before she died of her injuries was maybe 15%. When you multiplied these numbers together, the overall probability of her survival was so small, it was almost meaningless. Yet here she was, breathing steadily, her vital signs growing stronger by the hour. She's stable, Nathan announced to the waiting crew. She'll need weeks of recovery, but she's going to make it. A cheer went up from the gathered humans. Several of them hugged each other. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Grace Kim stood in the corner, her hand pressed against her golden cross, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "Thank you." Kethvaro did not know who she was thanking, but he suspected it was not the medical team. Over the following weeks, as the Starward Hope limped back toward Confederacy space, Kethvaro found himself obsessed with understanding human religion. He had dismissed it as primitive superstition, but what he had witnessed at Valen Prime challenged that assumption. These humans had achieved something impossible. They had saved 17,000 lives when the mathematics said half of them should have died. And they had done it through sheer determination, creativity, and something else. Something Kethvaro could not identify. He began to study. The ship's computer contained extensive files on human religious traditions. Kethvaro read through them systematically. He started with Christianity, the faith that Grace Kim followed. He read their holy book, the Bible, from beginning to end. He studied the story of their God creating the universe, the fall of humanity, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to redeem them. It was a strange story. A God who loved his creation so much that he became one of them. A God who suffered and died so that others might live. A God who conquered death itself and promised eternal life to those who believed. Kethvaro moved on to other faiths. He read the Quran and learned about Islam, a religion that emphasized submission to the one true God and care for the poor and suffering. He studied Judaism, the ancient faith from which Christianity had grown, with its emphasis on law, justice, and covenant with the divine. He read about Hinduism and its complex pantheon of gods, about Buddhism and its pursuit of enlightenment, about Sikhism and its commitment to service. The diversity was overwhelming. Humans had developed hundreds of different ways to understand the divine. They disagreed about nearly everything: names, rituals, rules, afterlives. Yet certain themes appeared again and again, across all their traditions: love, compassion, sacrifice, hope. These were not logical concepts. They could not be measured or quantified. Yet they seemed to be central to almost every human religion. One evening, Kethvaro sought out Grace Kim. He found her in the ship's observation deck, staring at the stars. "May I join you?" he asked. Grace nodded and made room for him on the bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching distant suns drift past the window. I have been studying your religions, Kethvaro finally said. I have read your scriptures and analyzed your beliefs, but I still do not understand what specifically. How can intelligent beings believe in something they cannot prove? You are a scientist. You understand evidence and logic. How do you reconcile this with faith in an invisible God? Grace smiled softly. Ambassador, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in love? The question surprised him. I was bonded to a mate for 12 cycles. We produced 3 offspring together. But did you love her? Kethvaro paused. He thought of his former mate, of the warmth he felt in her presence, of the pain when she passed away. Yes, he admitted. I loved her deeply. Can you prove that? I do not understand the question, Love Grace explained. Can you measure it? Can you put it under a microscope or detect it with instruments? Can you prove scientifically that you loved your mate? Kethvaro considered this. No, he finally said. I cannot. Love is an internal experience. It cannot be externally verified.
Exactly,
Grace said. But you don't doubt that it was real, do you? No. I experienced it. I know it was real. Faith is similar, Grace said. I can't prove God exists the way I can prove that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. But I experience His presence in my life. I feel His love when I see kindness in others. I sense His guidance when I face difficult decisions. I know He's real because I know Him, not just know about Him. Kethvaro struggled with this concept. The Velanthi valued empirical evidence above all else. The idea of knowing something through experience rather than proof was foreign to him. But your God, if he exists, allows suffering, Kethvaro pressed. The colonists at Valen Prime suffered terribly before we rescued them. If your God is all-powerful, why did he not prevent their pain? Grace's expression grew thoughtful. That's a question humans have wrestled with for thousands of years. We call it the problem of evil. Why does a loving God allow suffering? What answer have you found? Many answers, actually. Some say suffering builds character and brings us closer to God. Others say it's the result of human freedom. God gave us the ability to choose, and sometimes we choose poorly. Some believe suffering is a mystery we can't fully understand, but that God suffers with us. These answers seem insufficient, Kethvaro observed. Maybe they are, Grace admitted. But here's the thing, Ambassador. My faith doesn't promise me a life without suffering. It promises me that I'm not alone in my suffering. It promises that my pain has meaning. And it promises that one day, all suffering will end. And you believe this? With all my heart, he sat in silence again. Outside the window, stars burned against the darkness of space. Ambassador Grace said after a while, "Can I ask you something? Of course, you saw what happened at Valen Prime. You saw Captain Bennett fly into almost certain death to save strangers. You saw our crew push beyond their limits to save everyone when the mathematics said it was impossible. What did you think when you saw that?" Kethvaro remembered the chaos of the evacuation. He remembered the determination in Lisa Bennett's eyes. He remembered Grace herself, praying over the power systems before somehow finding a solution that should not have existed. "I thought you were all insane," he said honestly. Grace laughed. "Maybe we are, but we saved everyone," as Kethvaro agreed. "You did." He was beginning to understand something about humans. They did not always behave logically. They made decisions based on love, compassion, and faith, rather than pure reason. And somehow, impossibly, these irrational decisions often led to better outcomes, and cold calculation would have predicted. He did not know if the human God was real, but he was starting to suspect that believing in such a God made humans capable of things that should not be possible, and that was worth understanding. For 800 cycles, the Velanthi Confederacy had known peace. Their fleets patrolled the borders of known space, but they encountered no threats. The galaxy was vast and largely empty. Other civilizations kept to themselves, trading peacefully and avoiding conflict. War, the Velanthi believed, was a disease of primitive species. Then the Krath came. They emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies, from regions so far away that no probe had ever reached them. Their ships were massive, black, and covered in weapons. Their soldiers were tall, armored creatures bred for a single purpose: conquest. The first Confederacy world to encounter them was called Peloria. It was a peaceful colony of scientists and artists, home to 3 million Valanthi. The Krath fleet arrived without warning and demanded surrender. When the colonists refused, the Krath bombarded the planet from orbit. Within hours, Peloria was a graveyard. News of the attack spread quickly. The Confederacy Council convened an emergency session. They debated their options. Some called for immediate military response. Others argued for diplomacy. A few even suggested surrender. The Krath have conquered 1,000 species, one council member said. Their military technology is centuries ahead of ours. Resistance is futile. We should negotiate terms. Kethvaro sat in the gallery, listening to the debate. He had been promoted to senior diplomatic advisor after his work with the humans. Now he watched his people argue about whether to fight or submit, and then Admiral Christopher Hayes stood up. He was a human, one of several who had been invited to observe the session. He was old by human standards, with white hair and weathered skin. But his eyes were sharp, and his voice carried authority. "Permission to address the council," he said. The chamber fell silent. Humans were still considered a young and somewhat unstable species. Their opinion was not usually sought on matters of galactic importance. The council leader hesitated, then nodded. "You may speak." Christopher Hayes walked to the center of the chamber. He looked around at the assembled delegates, at the various species who had built the Confederacy over thousands of cycles. "I've listened to your debate," he said, "and I've heard a lot of fear. Fear is understandable. The Krath are powerful. They've destroyed worlds. They've killed millions. It would be easy to surrender." He paused, letting his words settle. "But I come from a species that has faced extinction many times. We've fought plagues, famines, ice ages, and wars that killed tens of millions. Every time someone said we should give up, every time we refused, and every time we survived." "Your species is young," a Valanthi delegate said. "You do not understand the scale of this threat." "Maybe not," Christopher admitted, "but I understand something else. I understand that some things are worth fighting for, even when you might lose. I understand that freedom has no meaning if you're not willing to die for it. And I understand that evil only wins when good people stop resisting." "These are pretty words," another delegate said. "But words cannot stop Krath weapons." "You're right," Christopher said. "But courage can. Determination can. Faith can." He turned to address the full council. "Humanity will fight the Krath. With or without the Confederacy's support, we will resist. We will not surrender our worlds or our people to slavers and killers. If we die free. But I don't think we'll die. I think we'll win, because we fight for something the Krath don't understand. We fight for love. We fight for hope. We fight because we believe that good is stronger than evil, even when evil looks unbeatable." The chamber was silent. Kethvaro watched his fellow delegates struggle with what they had heard. Humans were strange. They believed in things they could not prove. They fought battles they could not win. They were, by Valanthi standards, utterly irrational. But they were also brave in ways the Valanthi had forgotten how to be. The vote was close. But in the end, the Confederacy chose to fight. 3 months later, Kethvaro found himself aboard the human dreadnought Faithful Resolve, heading toward the largest battle in galactic history. The combined fleet of the Confederacy and humanity would meet the Krath Armada at a place called the Void, a region of empty space far from any inhabited world. The mood on the ship was strange. Kethvaro expected fear, anxiety, perhaps despair. The odds were against them. Intelligence reports suggested the Krath fleet outnumbered them 3-1. Many of the soldiers and crew would not survive the coming battle. Instead, he found peace. In the days before the battle, he watched humans prepare in ways he did not expect. They wrote letters to their families, recording messages to be sent if they did not return. They gathered in small groups to pray, holding hands and speaking words of comfort. The ship's chaplain, a man named Father Marcus Reyes, held services in the chapel every few hours. The chapel was always full. Cathvaro attended one of these services. He stood in the back, observing. Father Marcus spoke about courage and sacrifice. He read from the human scriptures, stories of ordinary people who faced impossible odds and prevailed through faith. He told the story of David and Goliath, a small boy who defeated a giant with nothing but a stone and trust in God. He spoke of martyrs who chose death rather than deny their beliefs. Tomorrow we face a great enemy, Father Marcus said. Some of us will not survive. But I want you to know something. Death is not the end. For those who believe death is simply a doorway to eternal life. Our bodies may fall, but our souls will live forever with God. After the service, Cathvaro approached the chaplain. You truly believe what you said? He asked. That death is not the end? Father Marcus smiled. With all my heart, how can you be certain? I can't prove it the way you might prove a mathematical equation, Father Marcus said, but I know it in my soul. I've seen people die with perfect peace, certain they were going to a better place. I've felt God's presence in moments of darkness. Faith isn't about certainty, Ambassador. It's about trust. And this trust makes you unafraid of death? It makes me free, Father Marcus said. When you're not afraid to die, you're free to truly live. You're free to fight for what matters without holding back. That's our advantage over the Krath. They fight for conquest. We fight for love. The battle began the next morning. The Krath fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of angry insects. Their ships were black and angular, bristling with weapons. They outnumbered the Confederacy fleet almost exactly 3-1, just as intelligence had predicted. The fighting was brutal. Cathvaro watched from the command center as ships exploded around them. The faithful resolve took hit after hit but kept fighting. Human pilots flew their fighters directly into enemy formations, knowing they would likely not survive. Some rammed their ships into Krath vessels, sacrificing themselves to take out key targets. It was not logical. It was not efficient. By every calculation, they should have been losing, but they were not losing. The humans fought with something the Krath had never encountered, complete disregard for their own survival. They were not suicidal. They simply valued something more than their own lives. And that made them terrifying. Cathvaro saw a young pilot named Danny Sullivan fly his damaged fighter into the engine core of a Krath carrier, destroying both in a massive explosion. He heard Danny's last words over the radio, "Tell my mom I love her. See you on the other side." He saw Captain Ruth Anderson order her crew to abandon ship while she stayed behind to manually fire the weapons. "Someone has to hold the line," she said calmly. "Might as well be me." He saw soldiers pray before charging into battle and chaplains comfort the dying with promises of paradise, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Krath were not prepared for an enemy who would not surrender, who would not retreat, who seemed to welcome death rather than accept defeat. Their formations broke. Their advance stalled. Ships began to flee. When the battle finally ended, the Confederacy had lost half its fleet, but the Krath had lost 2/3 of theirs. They retreated into the darkness between galaxies, broken and defeated. In the aftermath, a captured Krath commander was brought before Admiral Hayes. "What are you?" the Krath demanded. "We have conquered 1,000 species. None fight like this. None welcome death." Christopher Hayes looked at the alien with something like pity. "We don't welcome death," he said. "We just don't fear it. Because we know something you don't." "What is that?" "We fight for something bigger than ourselves. We fight because we believe every life has value. And we fight because we have faith that in the end, good will always defeat evil." The Krath stared at him in confusion. "Faith," the creature repeated. "What is faith?" Christopher Hayes smiled. "It's what makes humans impossible to conquer." 10 cycles had passed since the Battle of the Void. The galaxy had changed in ways Cathvaro could never have imagined. The Krath threat had united the Confederacy species as nothing before. Humans, once considered a curious novelty, were now respected members of the galactic community. Their courage at the void had earned them a permanent seat on the Confederacy Council, and Cathvaro himself had changed. He no longer saw human religion as primitive superstition. He had witnessed too much. He had seen soldiers charge into certain death with prayers on their lips. He had seen doctors work beyond exhaustion because they believed every life was sacred. He had seen ordinary people become heroes through the power of their faith, but he still did not understand. Not completely. That was why he had traveled to Earth, to the city humans called Jerusalem. It was an ancient place, holy to three of their major religions. For thousands of years, humans had fought and died for this small piece of land. Even now, in an age of starships and colonies on distant planets, Jerusalem remained special to billions of people. Cathvaro sat in a garden on the Mount of Olives, looking out over the old city. The stone walls glowed golden in the afternoon sun. Church bells rang in the distance. Somewhere, a man chanted prayers in an ancient language. Beside him sat Grace Kim. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray. She had retired from space service and returned to Earth to be with her grandchildren. But she had agreed to meet him when he requested it. She still wore her golden cross around her neck, though the metal was worn and faded from decades of wear. "Thank you for coming," Cathvaro said. Grace smiled. "I couldn't refuse the ambassador who helped save Valen Prime. That was mostly your captain's doing. And yours? We all did our part." She looked out over the city. "I've always loved this place. My grandmother brought me here when I was 12. She said it was where heaven touched earth." Cathvaro followed her gaze. To his Volanthi eyes, the city looked ordinary. Old buildings, narrow streets, crowds of tourists. He could not see what made it sacred. "I have studied human religion for 10 cycles," he said. "I have read your scriptures, observed your rituals, interviewed your priests and philosophers, and I still do not fully understand." "Everything," Cathvaro admitted, "but especially this. How can so many intelligent beings believe in something they cannot prove? I have met human scientists who believe in an afterlife. I have met human philosophers who trust in an invisible God. These are not ignorant people. They understand evidence and logic. Yet I maintain their faith." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a small stone from the ground and held it in her palm. "Ambassador, what is this?" "A stone? How do you know?" "I can see it, feel it. My instruments could analyze its composition," Good Grace said. "Now, do you love your children?" The question surprised him. "Yes, deeply." "How do you know?" Cathvaro paused. They had discussed this before years ago on the Starward Hope. "I know because I feel it." "Can you prove it? Can your instruments detect your love?" "No," he admitted. "But that does not mean it is not real." "Exactly." Grace set the stone down. "Some things are real, even though we can't prove them with instruments. Love is real. Beauty is real. The feeling you get when you watch a sunset or hold a newborn child, that's real too. These things can't be measured, but they exist. You are saying your God is like these things, real but unmeasurable? I'm saying God is the source of these things. Love exists because God is love. Beauty exists because God is beautiful. The longing we feel for something greater than ourselves, that's God calling to us." Cathvaro considered this. The Volanthi feel love. We appreciate beauty, but we do not attribute these things to a supernatural source. "Maybe not," Grace said. "But let me ask you this. Where do you think love comes from?" "Evolution. Social bonding increases survival rates. Love is simply a biological mechanism to encourage cooperation." "Is that all it is to you?" "When you think about your children, do you think about survival rates and biological mechanisms?" Cathvaro was silent. When he thought about his offspring, he did not think about evolution. He thought about their first words, their first steps, the pride he felt when they achieved something difficult. He thought about the ache in his chest when they were far away, and the joy when they returned. "No," he finally said. "It feels like more than that." "Because it is more than that," Grace said gently. "Love is a window into something deeper, something beyond the physical world. That's what faith is, Ambassador. It's recognizing that there's more to existence than what we can see and measure. It's trusting that the universe has meaning and purpose. And you believe this meaning comes from your God? I know it does. Not because I can prove it, but because I've experienced it. I've felt God's presence in moments of joy and moments of sorrow. I've sensed His guidance when I was lost. I've known His forgiveness when I failed. They sat in silence for a while. The sun was beginning to set, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. I watched your people die at the void, Kethvaro said quietly. I watched them fly into certain death with prayers on their lips. They were not afraid. Some of them seemed almost eager. Not eager to die, Grace corrected. Eager to do what was right regardless of the cost. There's a difference. But how could they face death so calmly? Grace touched her cross. Because they knew death wasn't the end. They believed they were going somewhere better, and that belief set them free. Free from fear, free from everything. When you're not afraid to die, nothing can control you. You can do what's right without worrying about the consequences. You can love without holding back. You can sacrifice for others without counting the cost. Kethvaro thought about all the human heroes he had known. Captain Lisa Bennett, flying into an explosion to save strangers. The soldiers at the void, giving their lives to protect their people. Doctors, engineers, ordinary humans doing extraordinary things because they believed their lives had purpose beyond mere survival. I do not know if your God is real, he said finally. My mind tells me it is unlikely. An invisible being who created the universe, who loves each individual creature, who conquered death and promises eternal life. It sounds like a story, a beautiful story, but still just a story. Grace nodded, not offended. And what does your heart tell you? Kethvaro closed his 4 eyes. He thought about love and sacrifice. He thought about beauty and meaning. He thought about the small, quiet voice inside him that sometimes whispered there must be more. My heart tells me that I want it to be true. Grace reached over and took his hand. Her skin was warm against his scales. That's where faith begins, she said. Not with certainty, but with hope. Not with proof, but with longing. You want there to be meaning? You want love to matter? You want death not to be the end? Those desires aren't weaknesses, Ambassador. They're echoes of something real. I believe we are made to seek your God. I believe we're made by Him. And just like a child instinctively seeks its parents, we instinctively seek our Creator. Every species that develops consciousness eventually asks the big questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? Does anything matter? Those questions wouldn't exist if there weren't answers. Kethvaro looked up at the darkening sky. The first stars were appearing, distant suns around which other worlds orbited. He had traveled among those stars for most of his long life. He had seen wonders that would take lifetimes to describe, but he had never found answers to the big questions until now. Perhaps, or at least the beginning of answers. I do not know if I will ever believe as you do, he told Grace. The Volanthi have been without faith for thousands of cycles. It does not come easily to us. Faith never comes easily to anyone, Grace replied. It's a choice, Ambassador. Every day, I choose to believe. Every day, I choose to trust. And every day, that choice is rewarded. She stood up slowly, her old joints protesting. Kethvaro stood with her. Thank you, he said. For everything. For your patience with my questions. For your kindness to a confused old alien who cannot stop trying to understand. Grace hugged him. After a moment of surprise, he returned the embrace. You're not confused, she said. You're seeking. And seekers eventually find what they're looking for. She walked away down the path, leaving Kethvaro alone in the garden. He stood there for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere out there, the galaxy continued turning. Species rose and fell. Wars were fought and peace was made. Life went on. But here, in this garden, in this ancient city, Kethvaro felt something he had never felt before. He felt as though something was listening. He did not pray. He did not know how. But he spoke anyway, quietly, to the darkness and the stars. If you are real, he whispered, help me understand. The stars did not answer. The wind did not speak. There was no sign, no miracle, no proof, but deep in his heart, in a place beyond logic and reason, Kethvaro felt a warmth that he could not explain. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, just maybe it was the beginning of everything. He did not know. But for the first time in his long life, he was willing to find out.